Hey, everybody. This is a time to welcome you back to another masterclass here at the Territorial Youth and Music Institutes. Today, I am exceptionally happy to introduce you to my brother and friend, Chris Hoffer. He is the finest drum set player in the Salvation Army world that I know. And I know that sounds like a big thing to say. I don't want to disrespect anybody else, but I want to say that Chris has really developed into perhaps one of the finest drum set players in the Salvation Army world. Now, I've been all over the place. I recommend him to you highly. I want to tell you a little bit about him because he lives here in Atlanta, Georgia. He attends the Atlanta Temple Corps, that's his church. And there he is a member of the band and plays in our worship band, but not on drums. He's actually usually the bass player, which is a kind of a cool thing. He also works with our explorers and is a part of a really cool ministry that we have called Creekside. He is a motivated individual. He's married to Megan. He has a son named Finn, and he graduated from the Georgia State University right here in the Atlanta area. I was teasing Brad on Monday about his favorite scripture verse because I couldn't remember what it was, but we did confirm it. And I've just had to confirm Chris's too, because I think it's important for you to know that we should grasp onto scripture. We should have something that we hide in our heart as strength for our journey, as they say. And Chris's favorite scripture passage is Psalm 139, which is pretty great. If you have a chance to check that out, that would be worthwhile reading to face the day. I don't want to take any more of Chris's time. Ladies and gentlemen, just common sense muting on the Zoom call, please. When you have a question, unmute, but if you are just here joining us and listening, please go ahead and mute your microphones and enjoy Chris Hoffer, everybody.
Thanks, Bernie. Welcome, everybody. So, as Bernie said, today we're going to talk about the drums. Man, it is a privilege to talk about this instrument. I love playing the drums. It brings me so much joy. But in case you didn't know, the drums have such a deep and rich history in our world. As far as I know, the drum is the first musical instrument that humans have created and been using, all the way back to ancient civilizations in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia. The drums have always been such an integral part of daily life. Obviously, they're used for making music, for fun, for just enjoyment. But perhaps the most important reason people use drums was for communication. Now, today in our society, we've got phones, we've got email, microphones, all kinds of things that help us communicate. But back in the day, they didn't have that kind of stuff. And so if people were trying to relay a message to a large crowd of people, oftentimes they would use drums and use different patterns and rhythms to signify different meanings. A really trivial version of that today is if I play this, you'll all know what it means. Right? Without saying any words, everybody knows that means something funny was just said, right? That's a really silly example of that. But on a deeper level, the drums throughout history have always been used to communicate something. Now, for me, as it relates to playing the drum set in a worship setting, I like to then think of what is it that I'm trying to communicate. Now, Bernie has been a mentor of mine for many years, and a lot of times when he's teaching students, he likes to ask, why do you play? And so in a similar way, for me, anytime I'm behind a drum set, I like to really examine what it is that I'm trying to communicate. And so as a worship team drummer, as a member of a brass band, or whatever ensemble in a worship setting, to me, I'm trying to worship. It's an act of worship. It's one of the avenues that I get to express my love and gratitude for our Creator. And so every time I approach this instrument, I think, how can I communicate that? How can I communicate my gratitude to God? And then how can I allow God to use me as a vessel to bring others into a relationship with Him through the music that I'm a part of? So even before I sit down behind a drum set, that's just kind of the mentality that I try to approach things. Now, obviously, we want to have fun. Playing drums is awesome. It's a lot of fun. But as well, if especially those who are a part of church groups, I really encourage you to just maybe think about how what you do behind the drums or any instrument really can be used for the benefit of the kingdom, right? So moving on now, we'll talk about perhaps some more practical things in terms of just logistics for drumming. I've got my mind in the right place, and so now I ask myself, well, what do I need to drum? Obviously, having a drum set would be ideal, but that can look different in all kinds of forms. Some people have lots of toms and cymbals and all that kind of stuff, and that is awesome. But at the very minimum, I feel like we need a bass drum and a snare drum. And of course, a hi-hat would be useful because then we could maybe get a nice groove going. But as long as you have just a few of those, especially the bass drum and the snare drum, you can go ahead and start drumming. For me, overall, I like to keep a very simple setup. It helps me not get distracted by shiny things or extra toms and stuff like that. Not to say that's bad, but for me, I think I've discovered that playing with less allows me to focus more on how I can serve the music or serve the moment, as opposed to just trying to figure out how I can use all these extra things. Cool. So for me, I like two toms, cymbals. Sometimes I'll have an extra crash, but that's kind of my starting place. If you're super new to drumming, let's just go over the names of the instruments. We've got a bass drum down here. We've got the snare drum. We've hi-hat, makes this really awesome sound. And then our cymbals. And lastly, we've got our toms. And I'd say the toms are probably the closest related to those early drums that I was talking about earlier. All right, so that is the starting place. You need drums to play drums. Next, you need a pair of sticks. You can play drums with your hands, but I think in our context for a worship team playing or even in a brass band, sticks are helpful. Brad gave some awesome pointers on Monday about how to hold your sticks. I'll do a quick review just in case you're joining new today. You take your index finger and your thumb, and you maybe a third of the way up the stick or whatever direction towards the bottom, a third from the bottom. You're going to grab it there, kind of tight, loose enough to where it can move, but strong enough to where you're not dropping it. And then you're going to wrap the rest of the fingers around. And if you watch Brad's video, having your wrist kind of down like this is a good starting place. All right. So if you're setting up, you've got your hi-hat over here, your snare drum here, and your feet on the pedals. I wish I had another camera so you could see the pedals, but you get the idea, right? So that is the setup, how we can get started. What is our role as a drummer? Why is it important to have drums in an ensemble? How can we be helpful? Where do we fit in the music? For me, the way I view drumming is that we lay the foundation and everything else is kind of layered on top of that. We are the timekeepers. I disagree with the fact that the drummers are the only timekeepers in the ensemble. I think everybody needs to practice good time. However, being that we're not also thinking about notes and chords and all those kind of things and words, for the most part, we're just focused on rhythm. So in that sense, we do bear more of the responsibility to keep good time. There's nothing worse than playing in a group and the drummer is just constantly pushing and pulling. It doesn't sound good. Here's a terrible example of that. right? Awful. It's not really fun to listen to. So what we want to do as drummers is to really lay down a solid foundation where the tempo feels good. And then from there, that gives confidence for the other members of the ensemble to layer stuff on top. So here's just a very simple groove, but make sure you're listening as I play this to the balance of the instruments, the volume of the bass drum in relation to the snare drum and the hi-hat. In worship music and most modern music, your bass drum and your snare drum are king. Everything else is just kind of extra textures, but the pulse and the time and the foundation really comes from your bass drum and your snare drum. All right, so here's just a very simple example of just a groove and trying to keep that fairly steady. Right, and from there, people can build on that. Yeah, so our role is to keep time. The next thing I would say is drummers influence a lot the shape of a song. Now, other people, obviously, everybody needs to practice good dynamics. And if you don't know what dynamics is, it's just the different volumes that you can play. There's really loud, fortissimo, or really soft, pianissimo, and lots of stuff in between. As drummers, naturally, our instrument is really loud. You don't have to hit it too hard, and it makes quite a powerful sound. So with that, again, we have a responsibility to really pay attention to the volume that we're playing. If it's an altar call after the sermon and you're playing and it's just really loud, that can be very distracting. And one of the key things that we as participants in a worship meeting want to be intentional about is not being a distraction. Again, another thing that Bernie likes to say is distraction-free worship is the best thing that we can do to help support our meetings. So again, shaping the song, how loud you play, how soft you play. And for me, I love to exaggerate stuff. So if the song calls for quiet, I like to really get quiet. If a song calls for being loud, I like to push the volume a bit. Because what I've found is that because we can shape the song, if I'm playing really quiet, it almost causes the rest of the band to also play quiet. But if I'm playing loud and it's supposed to be a quiet section, it's really hard for the rest of the ensemble to follow that. So again, that is one of the main ways that we can be influential in a group. And then another one is just we provide the groove, the style. What we play can really shape how the song sounds. So for instance, I've just been playing a very simple rock groove, but maybe the song has a little bit of a swing to it, so that would sound like this. A little bit of a shuffle to it. You can play a Latin style, and that would sound a little bit like this. That shapes the song. If I'm playing that style, it's very hard for the rest of the band not to try and follow. So again, it's a responsibility. You want to kind of play the style that fits the song. Another style would be a little bit of jazz. You'll see that a little more in brass music. They'll play maybe a jazz style or a Latin style. Usually in the praise band world, it's pretty straightforward. It's either more of the shuffle kind of feel, the bouncy groove, or just straight eighths. But again, just another example of how we as drummers can really influence how the song sounds. So again, between dynamics, keeping time, providing the groove, we have a big responsibility there. So always be intentional. Everything you do. I had a teacher tell me that when I'm playing, I don't want to ask questions. I don't want when I'm playing to sound like I'm uncertain. Always play with intention, even if it's quiet. Playing quietly doesn't mean you play sheepishly. Every note that you play has intention, has a purpose, and if you do it right, really serves the music. And that's my next point. That is our goals as that is our goal as musicians, is to serve the music. Again, that goes back to trying to be stylistically appropriate, play the right dynamics when you need to play soft and loud and all that stuff. But perhaps bigger than all of that is we need to serve the moment, know where we are, know what the goal of what we are doing is. And again, I'm relating all this stuff back to church because that's why we're doing what we're doing, is to worship God and to facilitate corporate worship. And so serve the moment, recognize that this might be a more intimate moment in the service, and so perhaps I scale things back. Maybe I don't play. Maybe I drop out the first half of a song and then sneak in. You may play a song every week and you play it one way at the top of the meeting. But if that same song is placed right after the message, you might not want to jump in straight away and play. You might want to sneak in maybe midway through the verse. So serve the music, and in doing so, also serve the moment. All right. Next, we talked a little bit about what you need in terms of drums, cymbals, and sticks. Let's talk a little bit about technique. There are a couple things that are just basic conventions, and then there are a couple of like little preferences of mine that kind of are pet peeves. But let's start with some of the basic conventions. On a drum itself, so we've got the drums and then the cymbals. On the drums, generally, unlike a lot of the other percussion instruments where you would play maybe closer to the edge and not directly in the center, for me, I find that getting the best sound out of a tom, you hit directly on the center. So I don't know how much you can see here. You can see I've got a nice ring of where the drums have been worn down, because that's generally where I like to hit it. And so if I turn off this mic, you'll hear a better sound. Right? It's a full sound. There's a little bit of ring, but that's where the drum would sing, which just means it speaks, it sounds its best in that place. Now, of course, you can hit closer to the edge and kind of hit the rim and stuff, and that's a stylistic thing. But for the most part, you're hitting dead center. All right. Same thing with the snare drum. You want to kind of aim towards the center, and again, you can kind of see the wear. For me, it's a little bit closer to the edge than the center, but it's still central on the drum and not all the way up against the rim. There are a couple ways you can hit the snare drum. The most basic way is just hitting it. Then there's what we call a rim shot, and in the context of drum set playing, rim shots are crucial because, like I said earlier, the bass drum and the snare drum are king in this kind of music. We have a constant backbeat, which, if you're counting in 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, your backbeat is going to be on beats 2 and 4. So let me just play that for those of you who might not be familiar with that. Right? And there I was doing a rim shot, which is, again, Brad explained a little bit about this, but you're hitting both the rim and the drum at the same time. and that just produces a fat, a big, a warm sound. Um, and there's a little bit of a misunderstanding that rim shots always have to be loud. It's all loudness, volume is all about control. I can still get an intense sound at a very quiet volume, and that's where technique really comes into play. So I'll play a normal groove with normal volume, and then I'll try and bring the volume down and see if I can still get a nice rim shot at a lower volume. All right. Right, so hopefully that came across well over the video, but I'm still, all of those were rim shots, and the reason I like using a rim shot is because you get that full sound, but don't let that stop you from playing quietly. And technique wise, I maybe came up a little closer to the rim there just so I can control the volume a little bit. Stick height is a big thing. Again, we've talked about that earlier this week, but if I'm moving my hand a wider distance from the drum, generally that's going to produce a louder sound. If I'm keeping my hands nice and tight, close to the drum, then it's going to be a much softer volume. Again, I can just demonstrate this real quick. Right, immediately when I drop the hands, the volume drops. And another technique, I don't know that it's necessary for beginners, but for me, when I'm playing quieter, I tend to just jump up on the sticks a little bit. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but if I'm usually here, if I'm playing quieter, I naturally just kind of slide up a little bit. And what that does is it makes the size of the stick a little bit smaller, and so the movement inherently, everything gets smaller. So we've talked about the snare drum hitting technique. We've talked about toms. For the most part, in a big groove on the hi-hat, I use what's called the shoulder of the stick. So that, I don't know if you can see it, but like this part on my drumstick is a little more worn down. And that's because I'm hitting here. I'm not doing this so much. There are times where music will call for that, but to get it, again, it's all about getting a nice, big, beefy sound that has nothing to do with volume. It's just you're pulling the best sound out of the instrument for that kind of thing is just hitting at the shoulder of the stick on the hi-hat. There is a big difference between that second one just sounds so much fuller. Perhaps it's a slightly longer sustain, but it sounds bigger. There are times where you will use both techniques. So, for instance, and that's just me adding an accent, and then that's pretty common too. But for the most part, I like to use the shoulder of the stick. Same thing applies to the cymbal, and this is where I'm now getting into the pet peeve. I hate it when I hear, and I used to do this, so again, these are lessons learned from me. I hate it when I hear people crash on a cymbal and hit it like this. That is a wimpy sound. It is okay when you're trying to do nice, light, cymbally stuff, that kind of stuff, but not when you're trying to like signal this a new section. So like going from verse to chorus, I crash right on the downbeat. You don't want it to sound like this. Man, that is not a good sound. You want it to feel big. Again, this goes back to playing with intent and authority and just being confident in your playing. Again, I like to use the shoulder, hit into the stick. I guess I naturally kind of swoop over to the side, but really you just want to hit it with the shoulder of the stick. And just a quick side note that goes into something that is really important is the angles at which you set stuff. I can't tell you how many times I've sat behind somebody else's drum set and the angles are really weird. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many times I see something like this, and that's how you get that wimpy sound, is because that's the only angle you have to hit it. Otherwise, you got to do something weird like that, and at that point, I'm stretching really far, and it's just not worth it. So be intentional about how you set up. You probably noticed I don't have the greatest posture. It's something I'm currently working on. But sit up straight, get your drums at good heights. Um, a lot of people set up really high and stretched out, and their ride cymbals like somewhere over here. The angle of their tom's really weird. All that stuff is really important because if you don't do that properly, you're just making everything difficult. And I think for a lot of young players, if they would just set up in what's called an ergonomic way, which is basically you're doing everything to be most efficient. I don't want to move from here to here. I don't want to do anything awkward. I want to be efficient in my movement, save all my energy for the music and not trying to reach the actual instrument. So I think a lot of people learning how to play drums make it really hard on themselves. And I think a breakthrough can happen simply by just repositioning the drums in a way that makes it very simple. All right, so enough about that. Back to the crash sound. Here's what I'm going for. It's that sound. So in a groove, here's how I personally would like to hear it. It's a fuller sound. It's just a better sound. So take my word for it. Hit your cymbals that way, and I think you'll be pretty happy. Yeah, and again with the dynamics, we'll talk a little bit about it later, but same thing with the snare drum and the rim shot. You can hit a cymbal softly, but still with that big warm sound. Again, it's stick height, it's how you hit it. I can play pretty quiet and get a nice full cymbal crash just by taking care of the technique which I hit it, which again, stick height, same place, and maybe I'll push into the cymbal a little bit on a quiet one. I think the official term is a ghost crash. I don't know, something like that. But here's just an example of how to get a full sound out of a very quiet crash. So I'll do a standard crash followed by a quiet one. Something about just even at a quiet volume, seeing the cymbal move and just the sound waves coming out from it that way, it feels bigger, but the volume isn't loud. Something about that feels and sounds better than playing quietly. So that's just a little tip if you want to explore that. I do encourage you to explore that. So we've talked about the drums, a little bit of technique. Before I move on to how to practice, I'll open it up for a couple questions, just because I don't want to go too far. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in. Preferably questions based on what we've talked about so far.
I can't wait to hear what Tucker has to say, but I want to add this idea real quick. When Chris played, I don't know if you guys heard the difference when he was just playing a backbeat and then when he was playing a backbeat with some of the ghost strokes in between. So just a standard 2 and 4 with a little bit of fun in his left hand really changes the feeling and the emotion of the purpose of his playing. And that's a great way to also keep time. So I want to comment on that and turn it over to Tucker, who's ready to ask a question.
Yeah. So going back to the quietness at church, sometimes when we have a quiet part, I've got a huge bag of sticks, and one of them is these supposed mute sticks. Do you think it'd be okay to like grab these mute sticks when it's supposed to be quiet and drop it and grab my other sticks? You think that's a good idea?
So that's not a bad idea. Um, for me, I found it's hard sometimes to switch sticks mid song, switch sticks mid
Yeah.
song. So I probably, unless you have a break in between sections, so maybe you start the song quiet and then there's like a little break and that gives you time to switch. Absolutely, great idea. Uh, but if it's a song that you don't really have the time to switch sticks, I wouldn't put yourself through the stress of trying to drop them and grab another one. But
Or maybe if
um,
I had like a stick bag, do you think that would
Yep.
work?
Yep. So it's a great question. I'm now gonna show you my stick bag and some of the sticks and the things that I use to get different sounds, especially like in a church setting where you can't just play super loud. Great question, Tucker. Yeah, the roots are perfect for playing soft. Absolutely use them. All the same techniques kind of apply with those roots. I've got a pair in this bag right now. Um, and yeah, if you had time to switch and you could go back to sticks, great. Sometimes people maybe mix it up and use one hot rod or root and then a snare drum stick. So that kind of quiets the cymbals a little bit, and then you can do this side stick thing, um, or vice versa. You can play the stick on the cymbals if you want more of a cymbal sound, and then the backbeat on the snare. But yeah, great. These are excellent for small spaces or if you're constantly getting yelled at for playing too loud. But I would also encourage uh, don't just default to this when it's quiet. Really try to practice playing quiet with your sticks. Um, it's a skill that people don't really practice enough because there are some sounds that sticks are just much better for. And so, yeah, great. Use these, Tucker. But also, man, I'd love to hear you practicing super soft with drumsticks because that is a skill that really will separate you from, your average Joe. But yeah, so you've got these roots which produce a different sound. Um, I find these very handy. On one side is a mallet, and the other side is the stick. And the
I
reason
really should get some of those.
yeah, I think you'd love them. And the reason I find them handy is because what I was saying earlier. Sometimes there's just not enough time to grab mallets and then put them down in my stick bag. Sorry, and then switch to sticks. So um, by having these, I can maybe enter a song, do a couple cymbal swells, maybe play on the toms, and then flip over when I need to and play drums. So let me give you an example of that, just so you can see how really useful these are. Right? I'm not trying to do a flip to be fancy. It's just a practical in that moment. Uh, and that way I don't really have to mess around with switching between sticks. Now, again, if you have the time, absolutely. Um, a lot of times in percussion, they'll have things called gig trays, which is just a music stand turned on its side, and then you can put a towel. But really, you can use anything that is maybe this height and put a towel over it. And the reason you put a towel over it is because you don't want this happening. So by putting a towel over it, it mutes those sounds. Like you said, a stick bag. I like to have mine on the drum because if I did need to put these down, it's right there and I just drop them in there. Hopefully you can see that. Just check my screen. Yeah. So here's my stick bag. Another type of stick or it's called a brush, just another tool you can use is this brush. If you haven't seen it before, you just push that in and you get all these awesome wires. And that is just a totally different sound. Um, again, if you're trying to play quiet, it's a good option. right? And again, I don't know if you saw what I did there at the end. I flipped this over and I used it as a mallet because the rubber side helps you get kind of a more subtle swell as opposed to if you're using this side where you can really hear the sticks or the bristles, wires, whatever. And I'm really big about finding as many ways as possible to use certain things. So like sticks, I want to really explore every possible sound I can use that with. You know, there's so many different textures on the drums. You can get all kinds of sounds, but even on the cymbals with just sticks, all those things. But then if you hit the edge of the stick, I mean, so many different things. But if you just limit yourself to just hitting them normally, you don't discover those cool sounds. And so another thing you can do with a brush is a nice little cymbal scrape. I hope you can hear that. All kinds of things you can do a swell like that by just splitting the brush on the cymbal. Many different things. I could spend hours talking about it. But really, if you have access to these things, or if you can buy them, if you take care of them, if you take care of your sticks, if you take care of your mallets and your brushes, they will last a long time. Same thing with your drums. Yet another thing Bernie taught me is if you take care of your instrument, it will take care of you. And I know sometimes this stuff can be expensive, but if you take care of it, you look after it, this stuff will last a long time. I've had these sticks for a very long time. Sometimes sticks breaks, and that, it is what it is. But take care of your gear, and you can really get a lot of mileage out of it. A lot of different sounds. Since you talked about trying to play quiet, I'm just checking my time here. There's other things you can do. I like to always have a couple bandanas on me. Bandanas are super cheap, and you can place those over the drums and get a softer sound. It may also make your snare drum sound a little lower, which
They
is
also
awesome.
double as a social distancing tool as well if you need a mask.
Yep. Wear a mask, stay home, all those things. Yeah, I like to put a towel over the drums, especially in a small church or a small building, and it just kind of mutes it a lot. So that's one thing, and that's really cheap. You can use a thin t-shirt. I like the bandanas because they're so thin, and so you can still bounce on the snare drum with them. Yeah. So actually, yeah, you can do it on toms too. So if you're a Beatles fan, this is how they got that sound back in the day, a muted tom thing. I don't really use this a whole lot, but it is fun when you do get to use it.
Actually, Chris, open up that, leave your vocal mic open just for this one.
All right.
Do that one more time.
That's a really simple thing, and it can mute your drums a little bit, make them sound softer. All right. Don't be afraid to try all these things out. Sometimes they don't work, and sometimes they're not appropriate. But knowledge is power. If you know how to do these, then in a pinch, if you're in a room and you're trying to play quiet and it's just never quiet enough, if you have some towels on you or a bandana, that can go a long way. More on muting, I actually had this bandana on my snare just to get a little bit of that ring out. Same thing on toms. I've got these little clips, and these ones are made by a drum company, but I always have one of these clips in my stick bag, and that's just a cheap paper clip, or I don't know what you call it, binder clip. And that can be used also to just keep stuff stuck so they don't fall off, and then you got to pick it up mid-song. All right, so that's a quick just overview of all different things you can do. You can put some auxiliary percussion on your cymbals to make them sound different. Tucker, yesterday you talked about the tambourine thing on a hi-hat. The one Bernie was talking about I have, but this is one I keep with me just because it's a little smaller. You can put it on your hi-hat and
Yeah, for whatever reason, when your vocal mic's on, we get a little bit more of the top end. You might be better to hear it.
Okay.
Because it's high end.
Yep. Right. So just all play around and stuff. Again, I think someone has said or quoted somebody saying that it's called playing for a reason. Have fun, experiment, just really explore all kinds of things, which leads me to some of the practice things that I'm going to talk about. So as you're exploring, one of the best things you can do is familiarize yourself with the genre. And genre is just simply a fancy word for the style of music. So if you're playing worship music on a Sunday, go listen to worship music. Learn from people who are doing this professionally, who have produced music, and you can trust that it's going to be at a decent level. Listen to records, listen to music, play along to them. A lot of times, there's a temptation to just going to a rehearsal and play a song how you would play it. And that's great. Creativity is wonderful, but the way you get creative is by exposing yourself to as much music as possible. And so in order to have your own voice on the instrument, you need to familiarize yourself with all these genres of music. And to circle back to what we're talking about, using this instrument as a form of communication, learning rhythms and beats and genres, that adds to your vocabulary on the instrument. Everything you play is part of this drum language. And so be a student of the game. Learn. Go to YouTube. A big part of my growth as a musician was just watching YouTube video after YouTube video. And then if there's something that caught my ear, I would then go and practice it. And so let's say you're given a song to learn on midweek Wednesday, and you got to play this Sunday. What do you do? How do you learn this song? So as I've said, you familiarize yourself with the genre. Next, after you've listened to this song, you want to break it down into sections. And I'm going to pull up a example of how I write out songs when I'm learning them. Sorry about that. Took a little longer than I wanted. So here's a song by Transmission. If you don't know about Transmission, we have all of our music, instrumental tracks. You can get stems, which are just broken down versions of the individual instruments. You've got the chord charts. All these resources you can find on our music website that are great practice tools, great for your church. And learning. So check that out. If somebody in the comments wants to maybe give a link, check that out. But here's an example of a chart that I have marked up, and this is how I approach learning a new song. So on Sunday, we're playing Everlasting Light, and I go find it. Hope preferably if you can find a recording. That's one of the easier ways to learn a song. And then as I'm listening, I write out what's called a roadmap, which is simply just a roadmap of how the song goes. How do I get from the start to finish? So this is what I do. At the top here, you can see my shorthand for how I abbreviate these sections. So I is intro, instrumental, V is verse, pre-chorus, chorus, and bridge. And so as I've listened to this song, I've just kind of made some notes. The top of this song, it's all in. I'm playing drums. Now you can be as detailed as you want, but this is just kind of a standard thing for me. And then when I get to the verse, I'm out. I make that note so that I remember. Then verse 2, I'm in. Groove hard. Pre-chorus, I just kind of continue that. Then when I get to the chorus, I'm big. Then you go to a little instrumental and then add a little stop and so on. So, you can see how I've written out this song. It's a long song, so got some notes. And then in my chart, like I write little marks. So on the bridge, if you see, I say out / then build, then big. So this is kind of where I'm building. This little mark is a little signal that when I get to this line, I'm getting ready to build and get big in volume. All right. So back here. So when I'm practicing, I learn the genre, go listen to it, make note of what kind of sounds. Like, is that a big, deep snare drum? And since we're here, why not? A big, deep snare drum sound. If you don't have time to tune your snare drum really low, you can take an old drum head and you can cut off the outer ring, and it will look something like this. And just by simply placing that on the snare drum, I've completely changed the sound of a drum. So that's just a quick tip, side note. So yeah, make note of what the sounds are on the instrument. Like, are these lower sounding drums, or how does the song sound? So go listen, write out the roadmap of a song. And my goal, I don't always succeed at this, but my goal is when I, especially on drums, being my first primary instrument, when I go to play on Sunday, I try to do it without my music. Not because it's just some competition, but for the most part, it's not like brass band music or choral music where there's all these intricate details. For the most part, what we play has a lot of repetition, and so just a little bit of dedicated practice, you can manage to get yourself to a place where you don't need to focus so much on the music. At the very least, even if I have the music right there just as a safety thing, which is always a good idea, I try to mentally prepare myself and practice so that I don't need to be glued on my music stand, so that at that point, what became practice and just playing the instrument, now I can actually be in the moment and worship. All right. But how you do that is by practicing. Break a song into sections like we've done. Isolate problem areas. If there's a really interesting groove that you're not sure how to play, repeat that section, listen to it back and back and back. Try and break it down, take it slow, practice with a metronome. My phone here, I have a metronome app so that I'm always here, and I'm going to have to switch cameras here. Bear with me. Bernie, ask a question or receive questions.
Well, do we have any questions for Chris? Anybody have a burning question?
Yeah, me again. For this Sunday, I'm playing at a new church, and I'm gonna play Soul on Fire. For that one, my toms are all like resonant. And I was gonna put my drum pad, my mute pad on it to kind of make that thump, but nah, I just got that idea for the handkerchief or whatever. Do you think I should still use like a drum pad?
I think the drum pad will kill the sound of their drums or your drums. Start with like a handkerchief or a t-shirt, a small towel, like a hand towel. Don't tell your mother I said to take any hand towels out of your house. But
I can always
all,
test it when we're
yeah, of
rehearsing.
course. take some options and then you'll have them. That's the best thing I could say to you.
Awesome. Any more questions? All right. So again, what I was saying is I like to use a metronome app, and a metronome is simply a device that helps keep a steady pulse. So if you can see this, it might be a glare. You might not be able to see it, but if you Google like a metronome app, I use one called Tempo, and
It's iPhone only, but yeah, Tempo.
yeah. So, but like there are tons of no matter what kind of phone, there are tons of apps out there. For me, I use Tempo, but there are lots available. Some might cost $1 or $2, but there are lots of free options too. And all that does is just help you practice, and it keeps you honest in terms of I may think I have good time, but if I play along to a metronome, there's no guessing. And Richard, who I see on this call, he can attest to the fact that when we do lessons, we always use a metronome because it helps keep us honest. And another way to practice with a steady pulse is to play along to the recording. That helps keep it fresh and fun. And then you can really, if you've learned the part that the drummer's doing on that song, then you can really see how you're lining up with it and feel the phrasing of the drummer and how he plays. So use a metronome, slow stuff down when you need to, and then when you're ready to bring it up to speed, play along with the recording and have fun doing that, like really dig into the part that the drummer plays. You may think it's simple, but the more you dig into what somebody's actually playing, you may find that there's some really cool things there. And again, all of that adds to your vocabulary on the drum set. Let's see here. Yeah, and just repetition. Make sure you repeat stuff. Like I alluded to a little bit earlier, practice until you can't get it wrong. Now, that's not to say that you'll never make a mistake again if you practice, but for the most part, if you really, really practice and be intentional about isolating problem areas and playing with a metronome, once you get up to actually play, you've rehearsed it so much that it feels natural. You know where the song's going to go, and you can actually not have to stress about some of the logistic side of things. You can just enjoy the moment, right? And as I said earlier, be a student of the game. Just use YouTube. There's a website called Drummer World that has lots of tutorials. Most of those tutorials are probably on YouTube now, but Drummer World is a good option. It breaks it down by style, and sometimes they have play-along recordings that you can play to. YouTube also has that. Yeah, vicfirth.com. Vicfirth.com. There's a section on vicfirth.com that has educational resources. Again, they have some play-alongs, lots of teaching tutorials. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about today, we could really go into detail. We'd be here for forever. Like tuning, learning how to tune. That's something I wanted to cover, but time is not happening for us. But all those things, the more you study, the more you really dig in, you will see that your growth as a player will really mature. And yeah, if this is a passion of yours, you really have to dedicate yourself to trying to educate yourself. Nobody can force you to learn anything. If you have a desire to play in your worship team, you need to take the initiative to practice and learn. And with the resources that we have out there today, with YouTube, with a vicfirth.com, the information is there. It's just whether you are proactive in using it. And a lot of the stuff, like I don't have a drum set at home, so how do I practice? You can play on your hands. You can set up pillows or different surfaces just so you get the spacing. But listening, you'd be amazed about how much you can learn just by listening. And then when you actually do get to a drum set, things feel a little bit easier because you've made connections with how it's supposed to sound and all those things. Some live playing tips when you do get an opportunity to play with a praise team or a brass band. For me, a long time I still at times struggle with nervousness when playing, but not as much anymore. And I'll tell you why. Um, when I was young, I used to get really, really, really nervous. I practiced. I was a kid that always practiced. Like I studied the music. I was ready, but man, I was just always scared to get up and play. And again, Bernie, as my mentor, told me once, it's not about you. Remove yourself from the equation. And what he meant by that is when we do play in a worship service, people's eyes aren't on me. It's not about me. What I'm doing is to support worshiping God. And so if you remind yourself, and to this day, before I play, I like to preferably I like to get behind the drums and just have my hands on the drums and just close my eyes and say, Lord, remove me from the equation. Calm my spirit and help me to just surrender this time to you. And in doing that, there's a little bit of relief because it isn't about me anymore. Like the attention is rightly so on God. So step one, that's a big thing for me personally, and it's something that I practice every time I play. Have fun. Again, it's called playing. Enjoy it. Have fun. Focus on your leader. There are times in a worship service where things may go a little bit differently. Your leader might be looking at the pastor, and the pastor may want you to play another chorus. Keep going because the Spirit's moving, and we don't want to ruin a moment. Or there may be a time where a speaker's getting up and they want to say something, so you got to be quiet. If you're just staring down into your hands and not paying attention to the leader, then you're going to miss some cues potentially. And that goes, again, brass band, music in general. Just keep your eyes up and aware. Smile to the musicians with you, like have fun, interact, anticipate, be aware, focus on your leader, just in case there is a signal. We talked about dynamics earlier. That is key. And again, depending on what room you're in, you may have to adjust your playing. We talked about that already. Something that we will hit on in the worship team breakout master classes, those happen at 1 p.m. And I believe, Josh, you can correct me if I'm wrong, on Friday, we're going to talk about the relationship between a bass player and a drummer. That is really key. I don't have time to really dig into that right now, but if you show up on Friday at 1 p.m. to the worship team breakouts masterclass, we can really dig into that, and that's going to be really fun. So if you're interested in pursuing this, really, I encourage you to check that out. It's going to be great. And then finally, for those of you who do read music and play in a brass band, I just want to show you a couple little things that I do to help me when I'm reading a piece of music. So I'm going to screen share again. All right, so here's a piece, Holy Spirit, You're Welcome Here. It's a popular praise and worship song, but our friend Steve Kellner has adapted it for a brass band, and he's an excellent writer. I love playing Steve's music because he writes great drum parts, great percussion parts. But there are some things that always can kind of throw curveballs for me when playing sheet music. A lot of times things are done in order for the music to fit on a certain amount of pages. Otherwise, for instance, I like to feel music in either 4-bar or 8-bar phrases. And so when I read a piece of music, I love to have either 8 bars on a line or 4 bars on a line. But the reality is that's just not realistic. And if you were to do that, you'd have a 7-page piece of music, and it's just not ideal. So to help myself out, when I get a new piece of music and I'm glancing over it before we rehearse it, I like to make these little markers, and that's just to show 4-bar phrases. So on here, you can see right here, that's 4 bars. And then here, notice that before I get to this next rehearsal marker, there's 2 bars. So if there is like an extra kind of couple of bars in the phrase, so for instance, this would be a 6-bar phrase. I like to note that so that I'm not caught losing attention and not counting properly. All right, so here you got 8. There's a 4-bar phrase. So little notes like that. I like to maybe highlight specific instructions. So here it says ride cymbal and diminuendo. It's telling me the hi-hat. And I just like to glance over the whole piece and just make little notes. And for me, the reason why I do the bar thing is because, again, like I want to keep my head out of the music and make sure I'm watching the conductor. In a brass band, the conductor may choose to speed up and slow down. But again, it's our responsibility as a percussion section to help establish the tempo. And so by doing this, it allows for me every now and again to just glance up at the conductor and make sure that I'm locking in with the time that the conductor is giving. All right, so same thing here. This is a 6-bar phrase. This may not make sense to everybody if you don't read music regularly, but if you do, hopefully that's a helpful hint. This one's a big one for me. So here you have a 4-bar phrase. Here I would be tempted to believe that this is a 4-bar phrase if I'm just not paying attention properly. Obviously, you want to count. You got to follow the music. But a lot of times when there's repetitive patterns, it's kind of easy to lose your place if you're not fully focused. So again, me writing these little phrase lines is just helpful. So here's a 3-bar phrase, so I know that on the 4th bar. Same thing with this one. This one is a famous drum chart, awesome piece, but man, it's kind of hard to follow if you don't know it, because there's just on every line there's a different number of bars, and so these little markers really just kind of help you follow along and not like close your eyes for a second and lose your place. Anyway, hopefully that's helpful. I would love to dig more into reading of music and little tips and tricks, but I think that's about the time that we have left for today. Any questions?
It is true. Anybody have any burning questions for Chris before we have to shut this down? All right. Well, we'll assume that's a no. And I'll just say to you guys, Chris is available for private lessons, you know, particularly during this week. There's probably still a couple slots left, as far as I know. I hope you're enjoying TYMI. This is a new normal for all of us, but we are really grateful that people have tuned in. Even after the videos have been recorded, we're seeing a lot of views, which is super cool. We exist to be a resource. Josh posted a link there for the transmission stuff. That's free at our website. You can go to YouTube, which is an incredible wealth of resources that has the transmission music or the territorial band music if you want to hear some of the things he's talked about. And if you stream music, you can find us on all of those platforms, which is pretty neat. But I want to say thank you to Chris for all your preparation and your hard work. Give him an air clap, everybody who's on the screen. And we will wish you all well. See you, if not tonight at Late Night Live or Soloist Night. Don't forget, we've got the Soloist Night program, which is also awesome. If we don't see you tonight, we'll see you tomorrow at Morning Manna. God bless you, everybody.